Let's talk about drones. You either love them or you hate them. I suspect, most people anyway. Some people even talk about shooting them out of the sky and think that it's their right to do so. In fact, some people have previously told me that they shoot them out of the sky and regularly do so. Other people have had arguments over whether you can land them or take off from a public footpath. In fact, some arguments have spilled into hundreds or thousands of comments on my TikTok account. So all of that and more in this video. Stay tuned. So any of you familiar with my TikTok account, which has by now well over 100,000 followers, so if you're not following there, please do so, because TikTok thinks I don't have enough followers to be verified, but I think I should, frankly. But anyway, so there's a massive argument spilled out over one video in particular on that TikTok account, which I commented on, and has fairly cleanly split opinion. Now, I love drones, as it happens, but I will fly them sensibly. And by the way, you will have to put up with the croaky voice because COVID, yes, that does exist to some people that still don't believe it. But anyway, so I'm going to show you this video. I'm going to tell you what the arguments were, and I'm going to tell you fairly plainly, fairly clearly what the law is and why a lot of those people, with respect, are wrong. Let's take a look at that video itself. So, give you some premise of this video before we even watch it. This chap is clearly flying this drone in a park-type area. Now, the first question I would raise is as to whether or not you need specific permission to be taking off and landing in this particular area. This is, after all, a public footpath, but it's always worth checking whether there's any bylaws. Most notably for national trust, they say no drone flying at all, and it's their private property, and if they've got those rules you must follow. Some local authorities are issuing public space protection orders, and within that saying no drones anywhere, anytime, for any reason, unless, of course, you get specific permission, which you'll know what you're doing if you're doing that. So unless you're in one of those areas, and this is genuinely a public place, which I haven't verified for this video, and don't be the keyboard warrior that says, oh, you haven't checked and whatever. I'm commenting on the law generally as to this situation, irrespective of whether he needs permission to be in that area or not. Because the argument is not about whether or not you need permission to fly in this, which way is it that way, this particular place here. That's not the argument. The argument is about what happens. Let's watch the video before we go too much further. So just pausing there. Obviously, he's landing on this footpath here, and it looks like one of the new Mavic Minis, so it's actually worth about £600 to £800, depending on where you buy it from. That's important for what he says next. But this dog has obviously decided that it's something that he needs to defend its owner from, so he's come along and attacked it, remembering that it's on a public footpath where you'd expect dogs. Now, there's arguments about the dog, whether the dog should be on lead and so on. Now, there's no specific law, unless, of course, it's a bylaw again. There's otherwise no specific law that says dogs must be on a lead. The only law is contained within the Dangerous Dogs Act. The dog must not be dangerously out of control. Now, I would argue here the dog was not dangerously out of control. The dog was simply curious. It's playing, essentially. If you threw a ball, the dog would go after the ball. The dog is not dangerously out of control if it goes after a ball and catches a ball or a frisbee. To the dog, this was a ball or a frisbee, so it went over to play with it. That's not dangerously out of control. That's the very, very, very first thing that I will say, because lots of the comments and the arguments on that video were the dog should be on a lead, the dog's dangerously out of control. No, it's not. If the dog had bitten somebody and attacked somebody, yes. But here, as I said, dog is thinking that it's a ball or a frisbee or something else otherwise to play with, or potentially to defend its owner from. And by the way, a dog defending its owner is not necessarily or automatically dangerously out of control either. Let's watch the rest of the video and you'll see what he says.
Sorry.
Okay.
Is it okay?
Well, I don't know yet.
Sorry.
Okay. I'm just going to take your details before, because they're like 1,500 quid if it's broken.
I know, but I mean, you are flying it around a lot of people.
I was landing. I wasn't flying it around people, I was landing. Yeah, I have to land.
So her first comment is, you are flying it around a lot of people. Now, this throws up other arguments and discussions as well. Now, if this indeed is a Mavic Mini, then it means it's under 250 grams, meaning it can be flown in the open A1 category, which means it can be flown closer than the 50-meter requirement, which other drones are required to maintain. However, there is additional law that comes into play. So the first argument to dispel outright is that lots of people think that it cannot and must not be flown within 50 meters. If it is indeed a Mavic Mini, which I believe it is, that's not the case, but that's not the end of the matter. But the lady's impression is that he's flying it around a lot of people. That's an objective point of view. Or her subjective point of view may not be an objective one. That's for you to decide. I believe it is, but at the moment, that's her subjective view. And there are other people standing around as well, so we will hear from them as well. Let's keep watching.
Land it on a flat. Yeah, what I'm doing is lawful. I do this for a living. I'm a photographer. I've been asked to come and do this. Well, your dog should be actually on leads. More.
So just pausing there. So obviously he's raising the argument dog should be on lead. Well, perhaps it would have been better if the dog's on the lead, to be perfectly honest, but there's no specific legal requirement that dog should be on lead. But winding back, he says he's doing it as a photographer. He's been asked to do this. So if he's doing this professionally, well, first of all, I would expect that he's got a landing pad so that he could land somewhere else. Because again, one of the arguments in the thread is that he needs a flat surface to land on. Now, I know that. I have a drone myself. As it happens, I land mine on my hand so that I can do it just anywhere. But yes, he could be landing it on the footpath because it's a flat surface. But if he's a photographer and he's doing it properly, I will put a link in the description below where you can go and look at courses on how to fly these properly and get properly qualified. Now, most of the times you should really have a landing pad so you've got something flat to land on. And he could have done that in the grass area somewhere further away from people. That's a point I'll come back to in a moment. The second point is, if he's doing it professionally, then he should have insurance. And he should know that within his insurance, he's got to be flying it carefully. But let's watch the rest before I come back to the law.
More so than me landing a drone on a path that I'm allowed to do.
Right.
So I'm going to need to take your details. This is obviously being documented as well, so.
Now, just pausing there. 2 or 3 things out of that little portion. First of all, yes, technically he is allowed to land on a public footpath. There is no specific law to say that he can't. Unless, of course, it's one of these areas with a bylaw, no drones and all of that sort of stuff. So remember, I'm not talking about those areas. I'm talking generally. If it's a public footpath, then he's allowed to land on there. Secondly, he says, I'm going to need to take your details. Well, that really is a matter for her. There's no legal compulsion upon her to provide details. But if he wanted to insist on that, then he would have to call the police if he believed there's some kind of crime. But that's not really the case here. At best, it would be civil. And at best, any kind of civil liability, there is an argument that she should provide details. But if she disagrees, then he'd be hard-pressed to find a law to support that. And the third thing that comes out of that is that he said this is all being documented. What he means is he's filming it, because obviously he's got a GoPro or similar on his person, which is essentially filming the conversation. Now, if he's operating commercially, then first of all, he's going to have insurance. And secondly, if he's operating commercially, then the data that he's gathering, he's doing it without her consent. And so as a business, it's turned now from she would have been incidentally captured on any footage because he'd be flying it around and he's not deliberately filming her. But now the conversation has turned to him. He's deliberately filming her, as he says, documenting all of this. So he's deliberately filming her and the conversation. Now, he would need her express consent to be gathering her personal information, which includes her face and everything else and so forth. Now, any business that is capturing someone's data and information needs to obtain that consent. So there's a lot of things going wrong for this drone flyer so far, and we haven't even got to the law yet. Let's listen on.
If my drone's knackered, what am I doing it for?
Yeah, I'm just interested. I'm not being cocky. What are you doing it for?
That's an interesting point. She asks what he's doing it for. She said, "I'm not being cocky. I'm just curious." So that's perfectly polite from her, in my view.
For work.
For work, he confirms once more. So again, he should have insurance and he should have her consent to be filming the conversation.
The archaeology.
For work. Well, she's going to have to. It's on camera.
You should be fine now.
Again, confirming that it's on camera. Again, now there's other people coming in and he should have their consent as well if he's operating as a business.
Really? Who says that? What law says that?
My advice to you is don't.
Okay, alright, don't worry. We've got it on film anyway, it's fine. We will just report it to the police. Yeah, you...
And now he says, report it to the police. Well, it's not a crime. So unless he can report a crime to the police, I don't really see what the police are going to have to do with it.
Dog should be on the lead, and what I'm doing is lawful. Thank you, I can prove it.
Irritating thing.
Whether or not it's lawful, I'll come back to in a moment. It's not entirely clear-cut. It almost never is. But as I said, I'll come back to that in a moment.
You're irritating. You're the most irritating thing.
Right.
Sticking this
Unprofessional.
into something that doesn't...
What did you say?
What did I say?
Yeah. Photography.
No, it's not actually.
Who do you work for?
Whoever, if someone did hire this guy, which I doubt, by the way, I doubt that anyone actually did hire this guy. I think he's just an auditor of sorts, giving some auditors a bad name, potentially, but...
Working for them.
None of your business.
And that's pretty much the end of the video. So now I'm going to turn to the law because there's a couple of important points here. First of all, the overarching point is he is somewhat right in that you can land on a public footpath, you can take off from a public footpath, notwithstanding, as I said, the caveats with local bylaws, private premises such as national trust, and so on and so forth. As an interesting tangent, you can fly over national trust land. They can't prevent you from doing that as long as it's higher up and not just sort of low-level flying. But if they say you can't take off from their land, then you can't take off from their land. They might take a different view to that, but case law says otherwise. But moving to the law, broadly speaking, there's no specific restriction on landing on a footpath. However, it's never as simple as that. Let's move to the CAA website. The CAA, for anyone unfamiliar, the Civil Aviation Authority, control and effectively regulate the airspace for the UK. Now, this goes into detail about various different drones and other restrictions. As I said, I believe this to be a Mavic Mini, so I'll stand to be corrected, but I believe that it is from the look of the back of the unit, and I'm going on that assumption. So if the drone is under 250 grams, there are some variations to the rules. If it has a camera, which this one does, you must register as an operator and have a flyer ID and do a test and so on. So there'll be, if he's done those tests and he's got the flyer ID, then there's no excuse to not know these rules that I'm going to point out to you now. Now, if you're flying a drone or model aircraft that's lighter than 250 grams, you can fly closer to people than 50 meters, and you can fly over them, but you must not fly over crowds. Now, this is not a crowd in this video. A crowd would be 20, 30 people gathered together or thereabouts. Again, there's no specific definition of a crowd. It could be just a huddle of people, of 5 to 10 people could be a crowd if they're all sort of huddled together. But that's not the point here. It's not relevant. But The important thing here is the following paragraph, and then I'll point out where that comes in law. It says, when you're thinking about how close you can fly, remember you must never put people in danger. Even small drones and model aircraft can injure people if you don't fly them safely. And of course, you've got to bear in mind restrictions around airports and all of that sort of stuff. But this is where the law comes from. This is the Air Navigation Order 2016, Article 241. Very straightforward, endangering safety of any person or property. Now, much as animal lovers won't like the fact that animals are currently considered property. So endangering any person or property, which, technically speaking, would include animals. Article 241 provides, a person must not recklessly or negligently cause or permit an aircraft to endanger any person or property. Now, taking those in turn, recklessly, you recognize that there is a risk of harm and you carry on anyway. If you throw a stone into, somebody's garden or over hedges, you will recognize that there is a risk of harm to somebody and you did it anyway. That's reckless. Or worse. Negligently is where there is a duty of care and you've acted in a way that is in breach of that duty of care. Very broadly speaking, without getting bogged down into the law of the thing, if you have and owe a duty of care to any other person, for example, road users, every single road user, and that includes pedestrians, will have a duty of care to every other road user. If you drive or you act in any way lower than the standards expected of one of those road users and it causes someone else to get injured, then that is negligent. You've broken your duty of care. So this piece of law provides a person must not recklessly or negligently cause or permit an aircraft to endanger any person or property. Now, in this scenario, with this video, this dog has obviously come close enough to this drone that it could have caused the dog an injury. And if it were close enough to a person, then it could have caused the person an injury. And so that would be in breach of Article 241, which applies to any aircraft, regardless of the size and who's flying it and where you're flying it. You must not recklessly or negligently cause or permit an aircraft to endanger, put in danger, any person or property. Now, the mere fact of the matter that this dog has come into contact with this drone, at no point did he express any concern for the dog, and that, quite frankly, is appalling, because perhaps the dog was injured. Clearly the lady would have been worried about the dog, but actually the lady was being kind and polite and was worried about whether the drone was damaged, because obviously the dog took it out of the air and the lady was worried whether the drone was damaged. But if this chap was doing it for work and should have had insurance, the insurance should have covered any kind of damage to the drone. So in that situation, he should have been worried about the dog, and breaking Article 241, then he should have been about the drone. So in the thread of comments on TikTok about this video, there's been lots of debate. I haven't added them up, but a significant number in favor of the drone flyer and a significant number in favor of the lady and her dog. And of course the people standing by that supported her, not him. And so it appears to me that most people supporting the drone flyer are a fan of drones. But I'm a fan of drones, but I'm giving you this objectively as an analysis of the law. In my view, this should not have been landed in that particular location, notwithstanding any other rules about bylaws, which, as I said, I haven't looked into. There's no need. But merely recognizing the fact that there was a risk of harm to the dog and the people around, he should have landed it elsewhere. And so in my view, he's put them in danger. You're welcome to disagree with me if you have a different view. Mine is a legal, qualified view, but I'd be interested in your thoughts and comments nonetheless. And I would appreciate you leaving those below. I would really appreciate you liking this video and sharing it with somebody and subscribing and pushing the algorithm so I can reach my goal of educating 1 million subscribers, which is my first ultimate goal on this channel, to help you understand law. And I do it despite the croaky throat and obviously COVID. So thank you for sticking with me. Thank you for putting up with my croaky throat. And I will see you next time.